Sometimes hamster owners will not be sure if they should keep their hamsters together. On one side, there are people like me who say that keeping hamsters together should be avoided at all costs. On the other side, there are some people, especially pet shops, who will advise owners to get two hamsters. In my personal opinion, keeping hamsters together, hamsters of any species, not only Syrian, is extremely dangerous. Hamsters are very territorial, and even though they might be fine as babies, they will grow to want their own territory. This will make them more aggressive, and they will fight, hurt, and even kill each other. Of course, as with anything, there will be exceptions, and you will hear people say, well, I had two hamsters, they never fought, they were happy together, and they were completely fine. This is an exception. I really want to stress that this is not what usually happens. When you hear these two conflicting opinions, it's very hard to make a decision, and because hamsters are cute, you might be tempted to put them together and see what happens. I want to read these stories today to show you what can happen if you keep your hamsters together. Of course, I want to thank everyone who shared their stories, and I ask you please not to direct any negative comments towards them. I'm very grateful to them for sharing these stories because these stories will hopefully prevent hamsters from suffering and dying in the future. So let's start with the first story. We had an accident where my child put the hamster in the wrong cage with another. The mistake was caught within 20 minutes. It was two male hamsters. The younger male had nearly taken off the leg of the old hamster, with countless bite injuries to both. The foot was dangling with bone sticking out. Our vet was able to save our old man, and he lived almost another year after that with good quality of life. Never put them together. When I was 13, I had two Russian dwarf hamsters since they couldn't be bought separately, sent by pets at home. They were not social at all and hated being held and were very aggressive. They would constantly fight each other in the cage, and it went so far so I had to put a plastic divider in the middle of the cage to give them some space. One day one of them got out by biting a big hole and bit the other one's leg. It was traumatic to see. I ended up separating them in different cages, and that was the best decision I did. It was so sad since they were brothers too. You can see here that even if they are littermates, things like this can happen. They can fight and injure each other. When I first got hamsters, my little brother didn't understand that Syrians don't go together. I had one on my bed and the other in his cage. I walked out the room to grab a drink just outside my bedroom and came back to them brawling on the bed. The smaller one, who was originally on my bed, got the side of his face pulled open. He, my brother, was fine. I took him, the hamster, to the vets. Since then, he has never touched them without permission. It's very important to explain the risks of putting them together to children, and continue to explain even if they say they understand. I work at a chain pet store. Day one, I was being given a tour of the pet care area. The manager was showing me how to check on each of the animals, one of which was a newly arrived group of winter white dwarf hamsters, 3 litter mates. We opened up the enclosure and discovered that one was not only dead, but his face had been eaten down to the bone. The other two were also covered in bloody scratches. We separated them immediately. This also happened overnight. Prior to this, they hadn't seen any aggression between them at all. When people say you can cohabitate hamsters as long as they're same-gender dwarf hamsters, I always remember my first day working at PetSmart. Not my hamsters, but a friend when I was younger had two Roborovsky brothers in one of those Rotostack cages, and they always squabbled until one day the inevitable happened and one killed the other. I can't remember the timeline for this, but it can't have been more than a few months. My first hamsters. They were winter whites, supposedly same litter, but I have no way to verify this. I found them listed for rehoming online and decided to go pick them up. They were in a critter trail together and had been that way for about a year, according to the previous owners. They were not too fond of humans and would bite whenever I took them out. I saw one had a lump on the side of his face and I took him to the vet. When I brought him back home, the two wouldn't stop fighting, so I went to the store and bought another critter trail. I didn't know better yet. His lump on his ear was an abscess from being bit and it getting infected. I had surgery on him to drain it, but it came back. The antibiotics didn't work and he passed away 2 months after we got him. I started researching hamsters at that point and moved the other one to a Savic hamster haven. Once he had more space, he actually bonded with us and became much nicer. He never bit us again and actually became cuddly when he would lay on our hands, and when we came in the room and he heard us, he would come out to the front of the cage and beg for food. He lived 2 years with us, so about 3 years of age after being given appropriate care. As you can see, to me it looked like they loved each other before I knew better. They used to always cuddle. My friend got 2 female Russian dwarf hamsters and was told by Pets at Home that since they were sisters, they could live together. I advised her to separate them as soon as possible. However, she didn't listen and told me they're fine, they've never fought before, and they have loads of space so they won't fight. A few weeks later, she was going to bed and saw the end of a fight between the sisters. They were rolling around the cage and she couldn't stop them. After only a couple of minutes, one was dead and the other one was eating it. She ate about 1/4 of the body before she could be separated from it. The one that survived didn't make it through the night. Such sad and too common of a story that I've heard. It's the third time that I've heard of something like that to people that I know of. I was told years ago by Pets at Home to get 2 dwarfs in one of them small plastic cages with no wheel. I believed them and I got what they recommended. One day I got home from school like 2 weeks after getting them and one of them was gone and his leg was left behind with blood everywhere. And the second one was dead from what I assume was eating his brother. He was also covered in blood and cuts. Never again. I did my research after that moment. Unfortunately, this is a very common story of pet shops recommending to people to get 2 hamsters and keep them together because they say they would get lonely. Hamsters will not get lonely, they are not social animals, and in nature they live alone. When I was younger, I believed Pets at Home when they said 2 male little mate robos could live together. They were fine for months, but then one day I found that one had ate the brain of the other. I went to Pets at Home heartbroken and they told me one would have died of natural causes and the other would have eaten it as a natural response to scavenging. I now know one probably killed the other. It was horrific and as a result, I did not take photos. When I asked people to share their stories, I also asked them to share some photos if they have them, because I planned to include them at the end of this video. However, I decided against it because I'm not sure if it will be breaking any YouTube rules. So I decided not to do it. I had 2 Russian dwarf hamsters that were brothers from the same cage at Pets at Home. A member of staff told me it's best to get 2 as they are sociable creatures. Being in my late teens, I didn't do enough research and within a few weeks, one had killed the other, eating half of its face off so you could see the root of his tooth. It was traumatizing and I didn't like the other hamster, so I did its basic care but didn't bond with him or hold him. I always thought they were getting along until this happened. It's really not worth the risk. Working at a pet store a few years ago, the number of days I walked in to bloody hamster hand marks on the glass I can't even count. Literally looks straight out of a horror movie. I worked there for about 4 years and I don't think we actually lost a hamster to cohabiting. We had to remove them from the enclosures because they had wounds all over, pretty often. In this case, no hamsters died, but as you can see, they fought often and they were injured very, very often. I've never cohabited, but I have stories. I have rescued robos that were cohabited and separated upon rescue in my car, separating before transit. Many robos get missexed, so robo babies are most common out of all the accidental litters I have seen. My favorite hamster of all time, a Syrian female Minty, I rescued from a rehoming post saying, "This is an aggressive hamster who ate her sister and she bites us and tries to escape." Minty was the most social hamster I had ever met. On day one, she came up to my hand and smelled me and walked across me. And when given an opportunity in life, she was a total diva. But Syrians will kill and eat each other if in close proximity because they are not social. In the wild, they have their own 6-mile territory. Here are some photos I have of what happens when you put two hamsters together. Plus a photo of Minty on day one just crossing my hand without fear. She never bit me, was aggressive or mean. She was just a dominant female with lots of energy, and unfortunately her first owner was told by a pet store that she could live together with her sister. This is Minty, she is adorable. My sister's boyfriend housed his dwarfs together, male and female. Male cracked into the skull of the female and ate her brain. This one is even more gory, so be careful. I worked at a pet store for 4 years. As much as I love hamsters, they were the one animal that was awful to deal with. Even the snakes were better to handle than hamsters. I came into work one morning and opened up the animals, and all seemed well with everyone. Come about 1 p.m. and time to do deep cleaning of an enclosure, holding two long-haired teddy bears that had blood everywhere. I was terrified to open it up, knowing what I would find. One didn't even look like a hamster anymore, and all you could see was blood and guts, and the other one was covered and tracked everywhere. We got that one cleaned up, and the enclosure clean, as there wasn't much else we could do. Well, 30 minutes later, the one started having an anal prolapse severely and was rushed to the vet just for it not to survive. I've also heard from numerous parents how they housed two only to wake up and find one dead and bloody and the other one covered in blood. I myself have seen them fight and have found plenty dead because of it, but that one is the one I will always remember. When I was a kid, we got a Syrian hamster. My parents thought that our hamster seemed lonely, so we got another about a month later. From the second he was put into our first hamster's cage, he seemed very aggressive, and after a day or two attacked our first hamster. Then my parents separated him for a few hours and put him back, but then he hurt our first hamster so badly that my parents gave up and returned him. Unfortunately, our first hamster died soon after. Keep in mind that I was only about 9 or 11 years old. And also, we didn't have knowledge about proper hamster care, and I didn't realize that hamsters were solitary, especially Syrian hamsters. This is another point that I wanted to discuss. It's not only hamsters that suffer here, it's also usually very young children who get to witness a very gory death of their beloved pet. My aunt had 2 Syrian hamsters in a critter trail for a few months, one for each child. One morning the kids went to feed them, and her hamster had ripped him apart and also died from injuries the next day. Recent story. I went on holiday and had left the hamsters alone for one night. The next day, when checking on them, I quickly realized that one had escaped his cage and got into the other hamster's enclosure. Luckily, one wasn't hurt, however, the other one had a cut or a bite on his nose. After crying excessively and a trip to the vet, thankfully he was absolutely fine and was healed beautifully. But it just shows that even a short period of time together can cause so much damage. In this case, both hamsters and the owner were lucky, but as you can see, even a short time spent together can have devastating consequences. I have rescued hamsters since 2014, and over the years I have grown a soft spot for Oborovskis. I once had one Hammy named Elsa. She was about a year or so, and later I got a younger girl and named her shockingly Anna. Anyways, they really hit it off and were enjoying each other's company. You could see how gentle and patient Elsa was with Anna. Since Anna was a little young girl, she had a lot of things to learn about life, and it seemed like Elsa were her older sister and took good care of her. This worked for at least 2 years, and then Elsa became very old. Like at least 3 years old, she became more grumpy and annoyed, so she started to bite and chase poor Anna. This can happen overnight, and you never know when it will happen, but you always have to be alert because it could be very fatal. In the wild, the hamsters could easily run away, but in an enclosure, it's not that easy. I had to separate them sadly, and I don't think I would let Anna be with another robo. So here we had two robo hamsters that were able to get along for a certain period of time, but in the end they had to be separated because of aggression. And this is what I talked about previously. Sometimes there are exceptions where they will get along fine, sometimes they will get along fine for a period of time and then get into a fight. Here, luckily, both hamsters survived, but often that's not the case. So if you're cohabiting your hamsters right now and they are doing fine, there is no guarantee that they will get along in the future. I have another story which is really bad. I once rescued a couple Roborovskis who I was told were two boys, but I found out they were a boy and a girl, so I ended up with babies. Anyways, after some time, the boys were really picking on each other, and especially one. I had them all in each their own Samla Casa, and I remember I once came home and washed them and suddenly found the father in this boy's cage. And then I saw that he had killed his son and ate on him. The blame was only mine. I underestimated the power and agility they have to get to each other's enclosure. They were apart, but not enough, even though I thought so. That was the last time I ever underestimated a hamster. Friends of ours got two Russian dwarfs. They got on well and lived happily together their whole lives. We went to a local independent pet shop to get dwarfs. As the kids were looking and choosing, other customers came in to the shop and we were rushed into picking two, to the point the woman just grabbed the second one and said, "Here." They were okay together at first, but started seeming like they weren't getting on, a squeak or noise. We separated them pretty quickly after that, and they both lived happily but separately. We actually don't think they were the same breed. One was gray like a winter white, and the other one was a classic Russian dwarf. We knew there was a good chance they would need to be separated and that it's actually more common for them not to get on than live okay together. So we didn't wait when they started to seem like they weren't happy. We never let them get to the point of actually full on fighting. As you can see from their experience, again, the pet shop will pressure people to get two hamsters. Now, they mention here that one was gray like a winter white and the other was a classic Russian dwarf. I'm not exactly sure what they mean here. Maybe the hamsters were actually both hybrids and of different coats. Was one Roborovsky and the other one a Russian dwarf? But if they had any questions, the pet shop should have been able to answer. But hopefully, the pet shop would not give them two separate species, even though at this point I would not be surprised.